So there's this guy who lives in India. He looks a lot like He-Man. There's a little video on YouTube you can find my action figures explaining all of this stuff. So yeah, letter shows up in Constantinople in 1165, and it says, "Hi, my name is Prester John. I live in India." Very vague about where it was. "I am a priest and also a king, and specifically because of that, God has given me all the best things, and I'm better than you in every conceivable way." And he has griffins, and he has monopods, and the Fountain of Youth, and all these untold riches, and like sentient jewels, and all this crazy stuff. Clearly, obviously fake, right? Except that everybody bought it, and passed it all around like a YouTube video. And for the next 500 years, people got obsessed with this, and like really thought Prester John was going to show up and save them from the infidels during the Crusades, and that maybe if we let priests be kings, we can have griffins too. And all of this crazy stuff went down for about 500 years, until enough of the world had been explored that it was very clear that there were no griffins anywhere, and everyone was very sad. I want this all to have been real instead of a huge hoax, because that's more awesome if it was real. And so I wrote a book about it. It's the beginning of a trilogy, and it essentially takes everything in that letter as real, and explores the whole myth and the making of the modern world, and it'll go on for a couple of years. So let's get started. "I woke at night, my skin hot and tight enough to crack like the shell of an egg. My mouth was full of sand, my chest scoured raw. The sand brought me back to myself, and I was relieved to find I still remembered Costus and Constantinople, still clutched them in my heart's hands like two tiny marble figures. Much else had spilled out onto the sea. My heart was a net of fish torn open. I came for something, didn't I? To find something. Images flickered and died, a tomb, a cross, a face with hollow eyes. I thought that I had a purpose once. The moon lay long and silver on the planks of dead ships on the beachhead, mass tangled with golden seaweed. Far off in the shadows, I thought I saw the broken, useless hulk of a lighthouse, its thin, fiery beam illuminating endless sand. Dark cliffs hunched behind it, circled by silent birds battling the wind through a heaven crowded with unfamiliar stars. A flock without their shepherd, wheeling wide, constellations broken open against a sharp sky. I moved toward the black mountains, my bones weeping in my flesh, begging to be allowed to lie down on the shore of the sand and perish. In this way I shall grind sin from my soul, I thought then, for the desert was always the redeemer of folly and flesh. Who under the copper domes will not laugh when I find my way home and tell them of these far places? The purity blazing from my scalp will blind them. It will force their gaze aside and crown me in silver. When I crest that range, I shall sit upon it as on the wall of the world, and the Logos will sit on my shoulder like a keen-eyed crow. I shall feel its claws in my bones. Thus I made my way, babbling to myself, imagining the wonder and envy of distant monks, and found grace for my blistered feet. A smooth rock path through the cliffside, winding thin and reluctant, slowly upward. The sandy sea pounded below, its gold turned to white by the moon gliding through her sphere. Waves sent sprays of glittering mica into the wind, long cries like unhurried arrows arced through the sky, low and sweet along crystal breakers. If not for the sand and my bleeding back, the land would have seemed something like the coast of the Bosphorus in summer, if lacking 1,000 colored tents gleaming in the heat. Dawn was nearly on me when I saw them. There had not been enough light before, or too much mountain. A line of stone cranes peered down at me through the heights, their long beaks beaten out of the golden cliffside rock, fronds of waving palm crowning their small, curious heads. They were fitted to the crest of the crags like a small fence, and as I squinted at it, it seemed to me that real cranes crept cautiously up between them. Scarlet faces and long, lithe bodies all of blue, fine, thin feathers like gold thread, spiking from their delicate heads. They frowned grimly like nothing so much as the front face of a phalanx, staring me down, stone pupils and black, wet eyes alternating. "You're too big," one cried out, the largest of all, whose cobalt feathers shone even in the thin light of just before dawn. It would be unfair advantage. It snapped its long beak several times like drum strikes. I finally struggled up the last rough stair of stone and stood upon the summit, the sea of sand whirring and heaving far below, my face welted with yesterday's heat, my rags scant comfort against the high winds that tore at me with bony fingers in place of the moon's flat, hard palm. The great crane stomped in consternation and danced up to me, its neck fully erect, and it nearly rose to my chin. No! It stamped its clawed feet. Go back down! You're far too big, it's entirely out of the question. The whole affair would fall to the enemy on grounds of unsporting conduct. I blinked. In my reasoning, I suppose that if birds could now be expected to talk, it was not too surprising that they talked nonsense. I can't go back down, I said slowly, as if to a very dense foreigner. I've only just come up, and I'm lost. I paused, wilting slightly under the accusing stares of 24 birds. Lost beyond measure. My name is John. I am a priest. The crane looked somewhat disappointed. Its fronds drooped. Then you haven't come for the war, it sighed. I have no hunger for war. It's all the fashion in my own country, but unlike fish stew, each nation does not perfect its own recipe. It is much the same everywhere, bland and bloody, and I have no more stomach for it here than I did there. The crane gave an odd avian snort. You are foreign and therefore ignorant. It is forgivable, but not attractive. It cocked its head to one side. The Rimal is treacherous and deep. You're lucky. Perhaps your survival is an omen. As to where you are, lost creature, that is easy. This is Pentixore. But of course that is like saying, this is the world. You are in it. This is the land of the Garanique, the great cranes, and we litter it with our feathers. I am Torgal. I lead the charge this year, and I have come with my crane knights to survey the higher ground before the enemy arrives. Torgal stamped the now sunny ground and screeched, an answering cry ululated from the long throats of the other birds. Their wheat-stalk legs flushed red in anticipation. And who is the enemy? I asked, if only to be polite. Torgal blinked slowly, masterfully retaining his calm in the face of such shocking idiocy. The pygmies, of course. We fight them every year, miniature men, miniature women like little dolls. Their fingers are so tiny we might mistake them for worms if we were not careful. They invade our territory in the spring, armored in mint leaves and fossil filthy amber, waving miniature swords of sharpened antler. They come screaming up over the hill with such a distasteful sound. They say we took a queen of theirs once and made her a crane. Oh, who knows if it ever happened. War cares nothing for factual histories. We beat them back with our wings, our claws, but it is harder and harder as the years go by, and they grow cleverer while we grow tired. The war gets our blood up, and we cannot help but feel joy when the spring winds blow over the Rimal, bringing the scent of mint with them. I sighed, rasping in my thirst. In my country, I seem to remember, there were endless wars of art. Some thought it was a sin to paint the face of God, others thought it was a virtue. And they met and fought and died and met again, and paintings came up and down like leaves changing. Torgal hooted derisively, but some of the other cranes nodded, as though seriously considering the issue of iconography. There's no silly aesthetic debate here, Torgal answered. The pygmy must be fought, or else the crane would perish. There is no choice. But as I said, you're much too big. If you fought with the pygmy, it would be unfair advantage. You're twice the size of their tallest warrior. If you fought with us, they would cry foul for the hiring of mercenaries. In either event, the whole business would have to be halted on account of technicality. My whole flesh shook. I wanted no blood, no talking birds, nor arcane military lore, only to rest in shadow and drink cool water. When I think on it now, I flush with embarrassment still for my body's weakness then and later. I said to Torgal, I do not want to fight. I didn't want to fight for paintings. I don't wish to fight for birds. We can't let you go. You might reveal our positions, expose us to despair and defeat. At the the sake of a simpering pygmy woman in a bed of mint. I swear I will not. I am chaste. I have taken vows. But give me water and point my feet to the direction of a city. I will not trouble you. The cranes conferred, blue heads bobbing up and down. Torgal finally cried out, clapping his beak again. Clap, clap, clap. We have determined water is acceptable if you stay well out of battle, and we will send you on your way when it is done. But for now, you are a prisoner of war and will be treated as such. Now go sit under the fig tree and don't talk. The army will be here soon, and on their heels the pygmies in their preposterous armor. I sank gratefully down beneath the glossy brown branches of the fig. Green fruit hung above me in crowded constellations. Shade closed over my woolly, grown-in tonsure, and I could have wept for its cool hands on my brow. I plucked a fruit and cracked it open, slurping the juice from the seedy pulp. It seemed odd only afterward that each seed was colorfully painted with the tiny image of a woman cradled in a blue shell of mussel, her head rimmed in silver. My belly would not hear of examining such things when they could be eaten instead, so I devoured 5 figs before a crane, smaller than Torgal and more silver than blue, walked gracefully toward me, on legs I could scarce believe would hold the weight of the bird, so like were they to stalks of white grass. The crane gently tapped the lids of her beak together, a much softer, kinder gesture than Torgal's clapping. She approached, I realized, as a man would approach a wild lion, with ginger politeness. I am Kukyuk. I have been, her cheek feathers flamed orange, excused from the war. I am here to feed and water you. I tried to smile, though my teeth ached and rattled in my skull like rusted locks. The crane ruffled her feathers in a starry display, and then, quick as a pelican collapsing into the sea, wrangled me onto my back and wedged open my jaw with her long, precise beak. I fought her. I screamed in protest, but she was so strong, stronger than a shipwrecked, starved man like me. So pinioned, I had a full view of Kukyuk as she closed her eyes and worked her pink throat until her gift came retching out of her. A pale mash of fish and fig and mouse and nameless insects. I gargled and thumped the ground uselessly with blistered fists, but my mouth was already full of it, over-sweet and over-salty, porridge thick and thin as water by turns. I could eat or choke. So like a baby bird, I submitted to the crane and swallowed over and over till she had no more to give. Trickles of the stuff dripped from the corners of my mouth, and my jaw throbbed when she withdrew her beak. I sat up, slightly sick with indignity, but already stronger, less ravenous and addled beneath the wide fig boughs. Kukyuk sat herself beside me, beaming, quite without any notion of my discomfiture. Without hope of apology, I thanked her. She demurred. I'm glad at least you are spared the battle to come. The crane deflated. Her shoulders slumped and her wings made disconsolate gestures in the sand. I am not glad, she said. I shall have to wait all year now before I can fight. My heart is ashamed and lonely for my comrades. But it is not in the smallest part correct to let prisoners starve. I have been assured I will be in the front lines next year as compensation. I shook my head. In my country, birds do not battle at all. You are so thirsty for it. This is not your country. And anyway, my heart doubts your words. Have you never seen a flock of crows savage a hawk? Certainly. Then do not wonder at us. I dare say, you do not make a study of the sociology of birds. All nature wars with itself. Well, if I may not rejoice for you, I do rejoice for myself, who might have been drafted but for my height. Kukyuk laughed, a long sound that took a great while to work its way through her sinuous throat. Would you like to watch the battle at my side, Stranger John? It is certainly an honor, and in this fashion I may not be entirely robbed of the season. I wish to do no such thing, but I feared to be wrestled from the earth once more, and so I followed the stately crane from the shade of the fig to the rear edge of the golden cliff. The sun hung high in the air like a bucket in an endless blue well. Kukyuk searched us out a squat inknut tree and and leapt into its branches, waiting for me to follow. We leaned out of the leaves to peer at the valley not far below, filled with two gilt armies standing at the ready. The cranes needed no armor or banners, their golden fronds bristled in the hot wind, and they puffed out their chests, screeching and stamping. Blue and silver and red their ranks went as one, they clapped their beaks like sergeants rat-a-tatting on 1,000 drums. Across from the avian line, the pygmies stood as a mass of bright green and gold, the joints of their amber breastplates bulbous and bubble, knotted with mint leaves, and those same leaves spiked through their hair. Some rode liquid-eyed fawns, others stood their ground on bare feet. Their swords were dull bones, some antlers, some the sharpened ribs of creatures I did not want to see with their skins on. The pygmies threw their heads back and keened, their tongues loose and wild. The sun blazed on them all, and the color rose high in countless cheeks. Kukyuk had begun to breathe heavily, hardly able to contain her excitement. And without warning, the two armies charged one another. And for a terrible moment, the valley was nothing but dust and feathers and bright leaves. Kukyuk hooted in solidarity for her brothers and sisters and flapped her great silver wings, sending a shower of nuts onto the sand. When the first flurry of dust settled, I saw that the pygmies and cranes did not kill each other, but were satisfied at a wound, a simple gash or dent in the bone, a bruise, their opposite numbers winded and gasping. The cranes danced with a resting grace around the pygmies, who for their part vigorously stomped and arched their backs with their own arcane steps. I was relieved. I thought that perhaps I'd been wrong to be so intolerant. It was clearly a sportsmanlike, theatrical kind of war, nothing serious, quite provincial and charming, really. Kukyuk began to writhe beside me in the boughs. Her wingtips brushed my chest, and they grew terribly hot, as if she'd fallen into a great fire. I tried not to watch her in her martial ecstasy and squinted, trying to see more clearly into the melee. And my lips drew back in horror. A crane had leapt upon a prostrate pygmy maiden and thrashed gently on top of her, his great wings enveloping her green-leafed hair with tenderness. Her face beneath him was contorted in pleasure, her heels digging into his blue back with delight, and she had her arms thrown wantonly around his feathery white neck. As I watched, I saw that the whole battlefield had degenerated thus. Pygmy men, small and fierce, had fallen upon the crane hens, and their lustful cries were like wolves howling. One maiden had thrown herself over a black crane and was rocking back and forth lasciviously, holding her brown breasts in both hands, her amber armor cast aside. The war ground had become a rutting field, and the wind was full of gasping. I turned to Kukyuk, who was in a frenzy of envy and loneliness, gazing at me with flashing wet eyes. What is this? What is this disgusting ritual? What sort of perversion do you practice here? The crane stared at me. It is our mating dance. You never heard how the cranes dance to call their mates. But they are not cranes. Do your women mirror your men in every way? This is our great dance. It is the most magnificent of our many behaviors. We battle every year, and every year we mate. If we wound them overmuch and take the day, the children are cranes long of neck and wing. If they win, our eggs crack open and outrun little pygmies with golden eyes. We are eternal enemies, immortal lovers. It is our way. It is our nature. Perversion would be to deny our beloveds, to deny ourselves, and look with longing over a wide field, holding ourselves back from the charge. It is against the law of God, I insisted. Nature dictates that like shall go with like. What? Kukyuk blinked. She shook her garlanded head. You are a stranger here, and you ought to keep uncharitable thoughts to yourself. Please. I cannot bear to witness such debauch. Send me to a city where men and monks live with whom I might converse, with whom I might hear and see sense, who can find me a map to Byzantium and away from this place. My cheeks burned, and though my body was weak, my cursed flesh, wicked and corruptible, it was moved by the keening of joy below. tried to stifle myself and thought of the cool shadows of the Hagia Sophia, of the mosaic Mary and her small gray mouth. The flesh may err, but never the word, I whispered to myself. The air around me rippled with sin. I shut my eyes to it. The silver blue crane was very near. I could hear her breath, smell the figs and fish still lingering there. The flesh may err, purred my body, betraying me wholly, allying itself with serpents and goats. The flesh may err. Please, I whispered, I'm a good man. The ink nuts rattled in the boughs as Cuckoo spread her wings wide and drew me inexorably into her embrace. I could not resist her when she fed me of her mouth. I could not resist her when she fed me of her body. I opened my eyes and was full of her silvery plumage, her black eyes which lashed at me in frenzy. She bit my shoulder, blood sluiced down my blistered arm. I snarled and tore her feathers from her skin. Perhaps I hoped to find a woman beneath. If so, I was disappointed. Think of Lita, she said. It will not be so terrible.